Imagine this. You walk into a room. No one turns their head. No one stirs. But then, a woman. She glances at you for a second, then looks again. And a third time, not because of your appearance, but because of the feeling your presence creates. You don't say a word. You don't flash your wallet. You don't try to impress. Yet she senses something. Steadiness, clarity, a depth that's hard to name. And that's what sets you apart from everyone else. This video isn't about money. It's not about tricks to win women. It's about 6 things deeper than money that women truly crave. Things that make them remember you, trust you, and stay, even if you never make a single promise. And the best part is, you don't have to change who you are. You just need to return to yourself. Keep watching, because you might realize you don't need to be better than others. You just need to become the man she can't forget. 1. High-value presence, captivating without saying a word. I still remember the first time I walked into an old bookstore tucked away in a quiet Manhattan neighborhood. The place had a kind of contemplative stillness, the scent of old pages, footsteps on wooden floors, and warm golden light spilling across towering shelves. As I was browsing, I suddenly felt the silence around me shift. Not because of noise, but because of a presence. A man had just walked in. He wasn't exceptionally tall. He didn't wear a designer suit, nor did he have an expensive watch or an overpowering cologne. But the way he opened the door, moved with calm steps, paused at each shelf, and carefully flipped through the pages. There was something about it that made people notice. No one pointed, no one whispered, but every passing glance lingered on him for just a second. That kind of magnetism can't be forced. It doesn't come from appearance or words. It comes from essence, a kind of quiet strength that makes others feel there's something deeper inside this man. Women, especially those who've been through enough superficial encounters, notice this difference very quickly. They don't need to explain it with words. They simply feel it. Because deep within their instincts, women aren't just attracted to looks. They seek a sense of safety. The quiet stability of a man can say more than 1,000 self-introductions. In a world where everyone tries to stand out, to grab attention, to shout, "I'm special," the man who doesn't need to prove he's special often becomes the most noticeable. It's like the deep sea. The surface is still, but everyone knows there's an entire world beneath. A man doesn't need to talk too much, fake a smile, or overexpress himself. And still he draws others in simply because he knows who he is. He doesn't need others to validate his worth, and that very detachment is what creates his allure. I remember once, in a business meeting in New Jersey, there was a young guy constantly trying to impress, cracking jokes, interrupting, always trying to show he was the smartest one in the room. Meanwhile, another man, around 40, with silver at his temples, stayed quiet, observing the whole time. He spoke only once, but when he did, the entire room fell silent. Not because he raised his voice, but because what he had to say mattered. What earned him respect wasn't loudness. It was the calm strength he carried. The silence of someone who had lived, stumbled, and no longer needed applause. Women pick up on this naturally. They're not drawn to the man who's trying to be the best in the room. They're drawn to the man who doesn't need to prove it, but whose presence shifts the room when he enters. And that kind of attraction isn't accidental. It's the result of years of inner work. Failures he never bragged about, pain he moved through without resentment, principles he kept even when no one was watching. It's a kind of gravity earned over time. A man like that doesn't need to shout that he's high value. His presence says it all. Someone once asked, "How do I become that captivating?" The answer isn't in memorizing a few techniques. It lies in stopping your search for external approval and starting to build your inner foundation. Learn to walk slowly but firmly. Learn to choose silence over pointless arguments. Learn to do what's right, even when no one applauds you for it. When you're grounded enough to no longer need to be the center of attention, that's when you become truly different. And in a world full of noise and pretense, that difference is exactly what makes you unforgettable. 2. Community value, being trusted by others. I once attended a small gathering at a wooden cabin by a lake in Michigan. There was no stage, no microphone, no spotlight, just real people sitting together, sharing about life, work, relationships, and even untold failures. In that atmosphere, there was a man everyone naturally gravitated toward. Not because he was the host, nor because he spoke a lot. He simply sat there, slowly nodding as someone told a story, occasionally asking a deep question or offering a comment that made the other person pause and reflect. Strangely enough, people trusted him. He didn't need to show off, yet he quietly became the soft center of the gathering. He didn't dominate the conversation, didn't interrupt anyone, didn't feel the need to explain all that he knew. But when advice was needed, all eyes naturally turned to him. That kind of trust doesn't come overnight. It's the result of consistent presence over the years. How he's lived, how he's helped others, and how many times he's kept his word in situations where no one required it. Social intelligence isn't just the ability to make small talk or tell jokes. It's the ability to make others feel respected in your presence. It's when you remember their names, look them in the eye when they speak, and make them feel that their story, however small, is worth listening to. Women have a very sharp instinct for this. When they see a man who is liked, respected, and trusted by those around him, it sends a deeper signal. He's been validated by his community. And in the most primal part of human instinct, the man trusted by his tribe is the one who can survive and protect. I saw this play out clearly at a backyard party in the suburbs of Dallas. A young guy dressed very flashily kept walking around introducing himself, laughing loudly, shaking hands firmly. Meanwhile, in the corner of the yard was a middle-aged man pouring drinks for friends, chatting with each person as if he'd known them for years. He wasn't eye-catching, but people kept coming back to ask his opinion or simply to sit near him. When a woman walked into the party, I noticed her eyes swept across both men and lingered longer on the one who wasn't trying to make an impression. Because women aren't drawn to the most cheerful guy in the room. They're drawn to the one who makes those around him feel at ease, safe, and free to be themselves. That man doesn't lead with his voice. He leads with the trust others place in him. Some people think that to attract women, you have to be the most visible one in the room. But sometimes it's the person who makes the room feel more breathable that gets remembered the longest. Social harmony isn't about how much space you occupy. It's about how you show up in that space. That's why, if you want to be genuinely attractive, don't just learn how to speak. Learn how to truly listen. Don't just tell your own story. Make others want to tell theirs to you. Build real relationships, not to win women, but to become someone the community respects. And from that, attraction naturally follows. Because when you become the man that others trust, respect, and turn to, women won't just notice you. They'll trust you. And sometimes, that trust is the beginning of something far deeper. 3. Inner confidence, steadiness without noise. I once met a man like that at a small seminar in San Diego. He didn't sit in the front row. He didn't raise his hand enthusiastically to speak. But during the break, I saw him standing quietly by a window pane, his eyes not absent-minded, but as if in conversation with himself. When a woman came over and asked what he thought about the topic that day, he turned, gave a faint smile, and replied with a very brief but thoughtful sentence. She smiled back, and instead of continuing to question him, she simply stood beside him. That silence wasn't awkward, it made people feel safe. True confidence doesn't come from the spotlight or from being praised. It doesn't show in a loud voice or a showy posture. It's a quiet inner strength, forged through failure, refined in solitude, and affirmed by the ability to stand firm when everything around is shaking. A man like that doesn't seek approval from others. He lives by his own standards, not to appear different, but because he once tried pleasing the world and realized it only made him lose himself. Women may not be able to name it, but they feel it. They recognize when a man looks at them not to ask for permission to be seen, but to share a space of equality, without pressure, without control, without pretense. And that very quality creates the strongest attraction, the feeling that around this man you don't need to perform. I still remember a coffee date with a friend who's a psychologist in New York. She described her current boyfriend like this. He never tries to impress. He just sits there, asks the right questions, truly listens, and doesn't avoid silence. But in that silence, I feel he understands me more than anyone who ever said they loved me. Real confidence isn't the absence of fear, but the courage to face fear without letting it dictate behavior. A man with inner strength isn't afraid of rejection because he knows his worth doesn't lie in someone else's yes or no. He enters a conversation not to win, but to connect. And if the connection doesn't happen, he hasn't lost anything, because he still has himself. What draws women in isn't a tough exterior, but the inner peace they feel in your presence. In a world full of chaos and fleeting relationships, a man who knows how to be still within himself becomes a kind of refuge. Not loud, not easily seen, but hard to forget. True confidence is knowing who you are, where you're going, and why you chose that path. It isn't arrogance or detachment. It's a deep humility, because only someone who's once been lost can truly appreciate finding direction again. And when you live with that kind of awareness, you don't need anyone to validate your worth. You already know it yourself. And a discerning woman will recognize you, not because you shine brighter than others, but because in a crowd full of performers, you are the one who chooses to simply be. Silent but not absent. Steady yet not cold. Open but without losing your boundaries. 4. Leadership. Calm yet decisive. I once visited a couple living in the suburbs of Seattle. The husband was a carpenter, quiet, with hands always dusted in wood. He didn't have a high degree, didn't manage anyone, but what stood out about him was his ability to make decisions calmly and without fuss. At dinner, when his wife was juggling cooking and soothing their crying child, he simply got up, carried the baby outside, gently rocked it while looking up at the sky. Not a single complaint. No need to ask, "Do you need help?" He just knew. Leadership in daily life isn't about being the head of a company or speaking in front of a crowd. It's the ability to step forward when needed, not to show off, but to bring order and safety. A man can lead by planning the weekend, ordering food when his partner is undecided, or simply offering the right advice at the right time without making others feel small. In the context of relationships, especially with independent women, leadership isn't about seizing control. It's about allowing them to let down their armor. Modern women often have to be strong, at work, in society, and in past relationships. But deep down, they still long to lean on someone steady. Not to be rescued, but to have a companion. Not to give up who they are, but to feel that someone is willing to share the weight of the storm. I remember once hiking in Yosemite with a group of friends. When we reached a steep, slippery slope, everyone began debating which path to take. One man in the group, who had been mostly quiet throughout the trip, simply looked at the map and said softly, "Left is safer. There are handholds. Let's go that way." No one objected. The group followed. Not because he acted like the leader, but because in that necessary moment, he stepped up without hesitation. Leadership doesn't have to be always right, but it must be willing. When a man knows how to make decisions, big or small, with clarity and thought, he shows that he has the strength to carry weight. And that makes women feel safe. Not because he can control everything, but because he doesn't run away. Unlike the stereotypical alpha male often seen in movies, A real leader doesn't shout to make others follow. He leads through consistency in action, the ability to remain calm when others waver, and especially through his capacity to see problems and offer solutions, without blaming, without complaining. When a man isn't afraid to choose and isn't afraid of responsibility, women feel protected and still free. That's the ideal state of a mature relationship, where no one is forcing, no one is dominating, and both know who they are walking with and why. Perhaps deep down, a woman doesn't need a hero from a fairy tale. She needs a man who knows his direction, walks steadily and quietly, and is ready to reach out when she's weary. And when she finds that man, she will stay, not because he is perfect, but because beside him, she no longer has to be strong alone. 5. Life purpose. When a man no longer drifts. I once met a remarkable man on an Amtrak train from Chicago to San Francisco. He sat quietly by the window seat, writing something in a worn-out notebook. When the train stopped at a small station, we started chatting. I asked him what he was working on. He replied, "I'm rewriting the plan for a community farming project in Fresno. I want people to eat food they grow themselves, even in the city." It wasn't a passionate voice. There was no ambition to become a billionaire. But there was something steady in his eyes that made it impossible not to listen. And I suddenly realized, it's people like him, those who live with clear direction, who inspire us without ever trying to teach. Life purpose doesn't have to be some grand dream of saving the world or building an empire. Sometimes it's simply the reason you get out of bed each morning, with alert eyes and a heart that isn't weary. It might be the job you choose, the ideal you follow, or something you want to build for the next generation. Whatever it is, if it's deep enough and true enough, others will notice, especially women. Women are drawn to men who are headed somewhere, not in the literal sense, but on an inner journey. They don't need you to be rich or famous, but they want to know, what are you living for? Are you struggling through life aimlessly, or do you have a compass so that even in storms you don't lose your way? I once knew a smart, successful woman living in Boston. She once told me she could love a man who hadn't yet succeeded, as long as he knew what he was working toward. I don't need someone who already has everything. I need someone who's going somewhere, with a reason deep enough not to give up halfway. When a man lives with purpose, each step he takes carries an energy that makes others want to walk beside him. Women feel at ease knowing you're not wandering, but moving towards something greater than yourself. They don't need to carry that journey for you, but they want to walk alongside it. And they need to know that if one day life becomes chaotic, you're still someone who won't lose direction. Without purpose, men easily slip into the quiet zone, where they repeat meaningless habits, where they live just to pass the day and forget the original reason they once dreamed. And from that quiet zone, attraction begins to fade. Because nothing is more captivating than someone who knows who he is and is striving to become a better version of himself, not to impress, but to live meaningfully. Imagine entering a relationship where every day you can silently answer the woman beside you, "I'm not perfect, but I'm living for something big enough not to quit. And if you walk with me, you won't get lost." That's not a promise. That's a testimony through how you live. And that testimony is what makes you not only loved, but trusted. 6. Emotional stability. Steady like an anchor in a storm. I once sat in a small diner in Portland when something happened that I'll never forget. A couple was sitting at the table across from me, clearly in the middle of an argument, but something caught my attention. The woman was speaking quickly, her eyes shimmering with tears, and the man, sitting across from her, didn't interrupt, didn't judge, didn't brace himself to handle the situation. He simply sat there listening. When she finally paused and sighed, he spoke, softly but clearly. "I don't want you to carry that feeling alone. Let's find a way through it together, okay? No blame, no counterattack, no walking away. Just a man sitting there, like a sturdy post in the middle of a swirling river. And I knew, even without hearing the whole conversation, that this woman wouldn't leave. Not because he made her less angry, but because he made the anger feel less frightening. Emotional stability isn't flashy. It doesn't make you stand out in a crowd, but it's what keeps you in someone's heart for a very long time. In a world full of stimulation, where everything is measured by speed and reaction, the person who doesn't react immediately is the one who has mastered himself. And women, who often have to brace themselves to keep everything together, sense this like a sixth sense. When you're the kind of man who doesn't get swept into emotional chaos easily, you become the one a woman can lean on when she herself feels unsteady. This doesn't mean you have to be cold or emotionless. On the contrary, you must be able to feel, but with a heart wise enough to hold space without breaking alongside the other's pain, and also without brushing that pain aside as inconvenient. I remember once a close friend of mine, a retired firefighter, told me that the most important thing he learned over the years wasn't how to put out fires, but how to keep a clear mind in the smoke. When the flames rise, the panicked run in circles, the steady one leads. And love sometimes is no different from a fire. It flares up from misunderstandings, from expectations, from old wounds that haven't healed. The emotionally stable man doesn't put out the fire immediately, but he doesn't add fuel to it either. He opens the windows, creates space, and helps guide them both out of the suffocating room. Emotional steadiness is forged in small moments, when you choose silence over a pointless argument, when you take a deep breath before replying to a message that hurt you, when you choose to ask a question instead of drawing a conclusion, when you admit you're wrong without losing your self-worth. Women don't need a man who always knows what to do. They need a man who isn't afraid of the moments when he doesn't know what to do. And from that place, trust is born. Not because you're always right, but because you don't run when emotions become unpredictable. In an age where people are quick to lash out, quick to judge, quick to block or unfollow over one misunderstanding, the one who remains calm is like holding a lantern steady in a gusty wind. Maybe its light is faint, but it never goes out. And that light, though it may not brighten the whole room, is what others seek when lost. So if you want to be the kind of man who gives a woman peace of mind when she's near, don't just polish your looks or rack up achievements. Train yourself to master your own emotional state, so that when life throws unpredictable winds your way, you don't have to run. You just need to remain steady. And in that moment, she won't have to brace herself anymore. Conclusion. There's something strange about how women choose a companion. They don't always choose the man who has it all, but often the one who is steady. Not necessarily wealthy, not necessarily brilliant, not movie star handsome. Just someone who makes them feel like they're no longer alone. The truly attractive man isn't the one trying to impress. He's the one who enters another's life as if he's already spent a long time with his own. He doesn't need to say much, because his presence speaks volumes. No need to show off, because his gaze already understands. No need to promise, because every small action testifies to who he is. He shows up with calm, communicates without boasting, carries confidence without arrogance, leads without control, lives with purpose without pretense, and stays composed in the storm like a warm house when it rains outside. These 6 qualities don't appear overnight. They can't be memorized. They are the result of intentional living, of facing oneself in loneliness, in failure, and in awakening. And when a man chooses to walk that path, not to be loved, but to become the best version of himself, then love no longer needs to be chased. It becomes resonance. Because in an increasingly noisy world, what a woman often needs is simply a man quiet enough that she can finally hear her own heart. Thank you for joining Daily Stoic, Strong Mindset, wishing you peace and mastery over yourself. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Daily Stoic, Strong Mindset channel to stay updated with more meaningful life lessons. See you in the next video.